What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I've got some more NBA news to, of course, be talking about with you guys. Again, there have been a lot of rumors recently actually surrounding Cedi Osman's names and a bunch of teams actually being interested in the Cavaliers sharpshooter. Again, one of the big teams interested in him actually happens to be San Antonio Spurs, with a bunch of different kind of reports being talked about that he is getting a lot of interest from them. Again, there is a report actually by Josh Paredes that does say this exactly. And again, before I get into this, I might actually read over the article, which is not something I often do in videos, but I actually thought, well, for a change, why not do it? But before we get into that, I just wanted to talk about my thoughts and opinions on this trade and how I actually think I don't really rate this necessarily for either teams. First of all, a lot of players have actually been put up for, trade very, very recently, but not as much as what previous years I think have had. And there have been a lot of teams kind of going out there and confirming that their asking price for a lot of these players are quite ridiculous. In fact, Caris LeVert the other day was said to be worth 2 first-round picks and a good role player to match salaries up. And not like just a salary role player, but a pretty solid guy. That's what the Indiana Pacers want for him. And to be honest, because there's not exactly too many good free agents in the new, next year's free agent market, I actually think a lot of teams will be willing to spend first-round picks to get the type of guy that they want. And I definitely do think some team out there might actually give up a first round pick, a protected first, and of course a good solid role player for a guy like Caris LeVert. Because again, he is still a very good defensive shot creator that can still put up 16 per game. But again, when it comes to a player like Cedi Osman, it's actually a really difficult situation because on paper, he would probably be worth a, solid role player and a couple of second round picks. But because, again, free agency is realistically pretty dead, like, the upcoming free agency is going to be one of the worst, most likely, that we've seen in a long time. There's only a couple notable free agents, and even the role players aren't exactly that great. So teams are going to have to give up a lot to, go out and actually trade for some of these players. And when the Cleveland Cavaliers, at the time of making this video, are 30-20, with a bunch of really solid players, they're not going to let go of a dude who's currently averaging 11 points per game in only 23 minutes and is shooting a, solid 36% on a pretty high, usage rate when it comes to shooting threes. Like, he's shot 78 threes of 215. And Cedi Osman's the type of guy where a lot of those threes have actually been bailouts. He seems to be that dude that always gets the bailout three-point shots. So realistically, I would bump his shooting percentage. If we get rid of the bailout shots, Cedi Osman is realistically a 38%, three-point shooter. And again, he's still only 26 years of age with like 2 or 3 years left on his contract on really solid money, on $7 million a year, which is a really good contract because he's not overpriced, he's not underpaid, and he's very, very tradable. And that's when it comes to the Spurs. The Cavaliers are not going to settle for anything that's not a first-round pick, in my opinion. And we, of course, know that the San Antonio Spurs would not be willing to give up a first-round pick to the Cleveland Cavaliers, especially considering they are not in the playoffs. They're not even in the play-in at the time making this video, and they're probably going to have a top 15 pick in next year's draft. And, hey, I know they'll probably not get exactly, too much worse, but if Dejounte Murray or a player like that were to get injured, it would look pretty bad for the Spurs, and they could definitely end up with a top 5 pick, maybe like next year or something like that. So there would be no way they would be willing to give up a first-round pick. Teams who I think would be willing to give up maybe a first-round pick to add a player like him are, of course, those teams who are contending, who could add that extra, shooter to the team. For example, maybe the Utah Jazz, the Dallas Mavericks to put around Luka Doncic, potentially the Milwaukee Bucks could be looking for a dude like that, another shooter to put around Giannis. Again, those type of teams. But the Cleveland Cavaliers are not in a rush to trade Cedi Osman, and they wouldn't do it unless they got a first-round pick. And again, even saying that, if they get a first-round pick back and it's like pick 25, well, it's more than likely that Cedi Osman is going to be better than whoever they take at 25. So it is a really, really difficult thing for the Cavaliers. So then again, I just don't think it makes sense for the San Antonio Spurs. But in this article, he actually goes on to say that the San Antonio Spurs have been involved in more trade rumors than usual this season and have already made a rare mid-season move. With the NBA trade deadline less than 2 weeks away, there's been a lot of chatter that they're not done yet. In the last rumor roundup for Bleacher Report, Jake Fisher brought a new name into the mix for the Silver and Black, Cleveland Cavaliers small forward Cedi Osman. At 6'7" and 230 pounds, Cedi Osman is now in his 5th season with the Cavaliers after being drafted 31st overall in 2015. After struggling from 3-point percentage last season at 30.6%, he's brought that numbers up to 36% this season, which is, again, his career mark at 35%. To get a better idea of what Osman brings to the court, I reached out to fan-sided colleague Josh Cornelison, I think that's how you say his name, who runs the Cleveland Cavaliers page, King James Gospel. What a name, there you go. He has a quote that says, Cedi was downright bad last season. So this is something of a bounce back season for him. He's a part of the bench unit that is killing teams for so much of this year. He is the Cavs' movement shooter, coming off screens and pin downs. He's a willing shooter, but not hyper accurate. He can handle some, but more as a secondary or tertiary option. I think that's how you say that word. That's a very smart word to be using, I think, for this NBA article. That's kind of crazy. We have another section saying, should the San Antonio Spurs trade for Cedi Osman? And I think this is kind of their opinion. From watching some footage and also reading up about Osman, it doesn't seem like he fulfills any sort of need for the Spurs right now. San Antonio is already full of undersized forwards and guards who offer average to below, average defense. They also have one of the better movement shooters in the league in Dougie McDermott. And that's the thing that I was going to point out. The San Antonio Spurs already have their Cedi Osman. They've already got Dougie McDermott, who is a very similar player to Osman. I think Dougie McDermott is a little better. They average similar stats, I believe, except McDermott, I think, is averaging I think he's on 5 million more each season, which is crazy to see. But they don't need another player like Cedi Osman. In fact, they've actually got quite a bit of role players on this Spurs team. I think they just need to keep drafting and try and draft a star and look to sign a star in free agency. And there's no reason that giving the San Antonio Spurs maybe one more year or something like that, where let's just say maybe they draft a solid player who eventually averages 15 per game for him, right? If they're a play-in team next year, there's no reason why a star wouldn't want to go and team up with DeJounte Murray, who is one of the most underrated players in the league, and I think is one of the best defensive guards in the league. There is no reason a player wouldn't want to do that. Not just that, this team is full of role players, and I think the reason they're not better is because they don't have a star to surround these role players with. These role players are having to step up, and some of them are having to be the stars of the team, especially if DeJounte Murray is having an inconsistent game. You'll often see a dude like Dougie McDermott actually take more shots and try and play that bigger role. I think if they had an extra star, maybe I won't say Bradley Beal. I think this team needs a forward star, because you've already got players, I think, on this team like Lonnie Walker, who I think will eventually get to that next step of being a solid player. And you've already got, DeJounte Murray. So if I was them, and I actually do like Jakob Poeltl at center, so I don't necessarily know if that's the thing. If I was them, I'd look to try and bring in a forward star, which is, again, is very hard to do, but I'm sure they could eventually find one out there. Not this free agency, or maybe, I guess maybe not the next, but honestly, if they can contend for that play-in tournament, bring in a, all-star caliber forward, whoever that may be, I'm not exactly too sure, then why not? Why couldn't they, potentially do something? And I think it would be a really interesting thing. Again, maybe a dude like Brandon Ingram, who the Pelicans just seem to get worse and worse every year. Brandon Ingram fits a nice mid-range thing that Greg Popovich does like. He would actually be a solid player, and he's not undersized at all, and maybe can help out on the defensive end, especially with his long reach. And then again, you can potentially maybe sign one or two more role players in free agency once you've done that, and continue going from there. I think that's the San Antonio Spurs direction. I don't think they need to trade for Cedi Osman. They have a bunch of role plays, and I just don't think there is really a potential need to. But of course, this is just my opinion. I would really like to hear your thoughts and opinions on this down below. Don't forget to comment in the comment section down below. What do you guys think about Cedi Osman? Should the San Antonio Spurs, of course, try and trade for him? Should the Cleveland Cavaliers maybe trade him away? Again, definitely let me know your thoughts and opinions on this down below. Of course, don't forget to subscribe to my gaming channel and my IRL/long channel. And check out my podcast as well if you haven't already, which I will, of course, be linking in the description down below. But as I was saying, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and comment. And I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.